Okay, good morning, everybody. It is 8:30, so we will kick off the December 5th, 2024 meeting of the Lower Downtown Design Review Commission, calling this meeting to order. We'll start out with introductions, and since I have the microphone first, I'll start. I'm Heather Vasquez Johnson, practicing architect and chair.
Amy Sanborn, preservation architect.
Nick Allen, developer.
Craig Lawrence, owner operator.
Jim Gravener, resident.
Andy Duckett, MP, preservation architect and co-chair.
Fred Glick, property owner.
And I'm Brittany Bryant, Denver Landmark Preservation staff.
Great, thank you, everybody. Did we get a meeting record to approve for November?
No, I have not had.
No. Okay, so we have no meeting record. I'm just checking back at the email and there's no meeting record. So no meeting record from last month to approve. Before we get started, up on the screen for anyone joining us virtually, you will see some audio tips for your any virtual participants. So for the best sound quality, we recommend that you download Zoom on your desktop, laptop, tablet, or mobile device. Click on the audio settings to bring up an additional menu. Try adding a background noise suppression. If you are presenting or a public commenter and you are joining us virtually, when it is your turn to speak, to mute or unmute, click on the microphone icon. And expanding that menu will give you some additional options to test your devices and your sound. And then if you continue to have audio challenges, please switch to phone for audio. So up on screen for those virtually and in person is the process for design review. I will announce the agenda item by agenda item number and address. If any commission members have a conflict of interest, they will announce that and leave the room. At that point, staff will introduce the application and give staff's recommendation to the commission. When staff's introduction is complete, commissioners may question staff. At that time, the applicant will be invited to give a presentation, and they will have, we don't have any infill today, so 10 minutes, after which time the commissioners may question the applicant. We will open it up for public comment. If there's anybody to speak on that, and they'll have 2 minutes per person. Follow up with any staff clarifications and then open commission deliberation and have a commission motion and vote. So we have 2 items on design review today. Our first item is number 2022-CSP-011-amend at 1400 16th Street, also known as 16 Market Square. I'll turn it over to Crystal.
Is your microphone on?
Great. So this is a CSP amendment for an existing comprehensive sign plan at 1400 16th Street, a non-contributing structure in the district. The applicant is requesting to amend the existing CSP to add upper story wall signs at 2 locations to the CSP. Here you can see the building. It's both buildings that goes across 16th Street. Next slide. So here's the site plan for the development. The applicant is requesting to add 2 upper story wall sign locations into the CSP at the rear of the structure for a single signature tenant that occupies a majority of the building. Only 1 upper story wall sign location would be allowed to be used at a time. On the right side of the screen, you can just see the adjusted sign allowance table, adding the allowance for 1 upper story wall sign for the building. And this is just circling, showing you where those locations are at the rear of the structure. So here's the rear interior lot elevation of the structure. The 2 orange locations are the proposed upper story wall sign locations. And at the bottom right is the new upper story wall sign page that will be added to the document if approved. Overall, the proposal meets most of Design Guideline 1.10C for contemporary or non-contributing buildings, except for point numbers 3 and 4. 3, which states sign design is integrated into the building's architecture. And 4, that an upper story wall sign is limited to primary elevations with a maximum of one sign per building or major building component. The proposed sign is near the top of the rear of the structure and not integrated into the architecture of a primary elevation. The two locations are proposed are not located on a primary elevation of the building, but rather located at the rear of the structure, which does not meet point 4. Next slide. Sorry, I added those in. Thought they were helpful. Okay, so here's some street views showing different street views from different streets of these locations circled in orange. There's lots of them. So intent statement 1.10 states to allow upper story signage in unusual cases to acknowledge a single signature tenant while also ensuring the overall signage program enhances the pedestrian streetscape. Not all structures in lower downtown, the historic district can have this type of signage only in unusual cases per the intent statement where all of these design guidelines can be met. Additionally, design guideline 1.2A states to design signs to be human scaled rather than automobile oriented, so they're easily viewed by pedestrians at sidewalk level. The two upper story wall sign locations at the rear of the structure are not really oriented to enhance the pedestrian streetscape and feel like they're more oriented towards automobiles. Although staff understands the challenges with the architecture of this structure, staff believes finding a signage location on a primary elevation is important and that all of the design guidelines should be met. Next slide. So staff is recommending denial of this application based on design policy standards and guidelines 1.2, 1.4, and 1.10.
Great, thank you, Crystal. Does the commission have any questions for staff?
I think one of the comments, at least in the guidelines, is related to kind of typical signage cases. I mean, the one example I could find kind of nearby was for the Denver Metro Chamber of Commerce that has a very large alley, kind of non-primary upper story wall sign. And I don't know, was that taken into consideration?
I have not seen that one, so I'd have to look into it. But we typically don't allow signs on rear alley elevations. Occasionally we do allow some like near a main entrance. So I think Huntington Bank has one on the side alley that's right near parking spaces that they have, but that's not an upper story wall sign. It's at the ground level over their parking. So we allow it in cases where there might be an entrance or something that leads you into the business, but not typically at the rear. So I would have to research the permit to see when that was issued.
Thanks, Nick. Are there any other commissioner questions for staff? Okay, I'm not seeing any. Thank you, Crystal. At this time, I'd like to invite the applicant up to join us at the front table. And if you could please start with name and address for the record. And as soon as Brittany gets the timer up, you'll have 10 minutes here.
Great. Thank you. I'm Chuck DeMoino with Art House Design. We're the applicant on behalf of Lincoln Properties and 16 Market Square Corporation. 2373 Central Park Boulevard, Denver, Colorado is our address of our office.
I'm Brian Leach, and I'm the founder and CEO of Ibotta, the company that's working with Chuck in relation to the proposed signage. And nice to see all y'all, and thanks for doing this.
Yeah, I want to thank the commission for hearing and accepting this application and hearing our proposal. The existing comprehensive sign plan we did in 2002 was approved in 2023, beginning of 2023. And that was really to provide ground level retail tenants the ability to have vibrant expression of their businesses, and really to create kind of that vital, what I often call kind of eclectic vitality. And the eclectic part is just kind of that varying scale of signage and different types of signage, which is very common in Lodo and part of the character of Lodo. So we appreciate that. But since then, the building owner has realized that the need for firms like Ibotta, you know, for signature tenants that they need to request upper story wall signs. And we think that this building actually is a little bit unique because it actually has 3 street frontages, Market, Blake, and 16th, and almost really doesn't have a rear elevation. It's almost more of that west elevation is almost more of like side elevation. The alley itself bifurcates the building between Blake and Market. So we're really looking at trying to use those locations on that west elevation as really kind of a as a side elevation, and kind of treat it almost like some of the historic buildings in Lodo that have signage on their side elevations. You know, I think inherently wall signs are not necessarily intended to be fully pedestrian oriented, you know, especially as they become upper story wall signs. I think there's kind of a uniqueness about that the size of them, if they were necessarily pedestrian size, would be diminutive and look very awkward and silly and out of proportion to the building. So, you know, that's why the locations we're proposing and kind of the general size, at least in those orange diagram blocks, that's why we're showing them there. And so I do think they do provide kind of multi-purpose functions, though, both to vehicular and pedestrians. You know, you can be a couple blocks away and walking and see signs, and they really almost act as a landmark. And somebody could see that and go, okay, yeah, I know that's the corner of 16th and Market. You know, so they do act as a landmark both for vehicular and pedestrians. And I would say even for vehicular, sometimes I know I look for signage, and you kind of look at it as a way of navigating and knowing where you're going, which I actually think helps with pedestrian traffic flow, you know, so cars and pedestrians aren't hopefully in too much conflict. You know, we did submit a letter with the application. Again, you know, that unfortunately, the office occupancy rates in Denver and in Lodo are, you know, in the 30% range, you know, plus or minus, I think, depending on which reports you read. And part of the reason why that the owner wants to be able to provide tenants like Ibotta with these upper story wall signs is to provide that identification that, you know, shows that they're there. And it is a sense of pride for the business to be able to put their identity outside. And as the guidelines even state that, you know, identifying businesses with signage is essential. And so it's very important to the business, but it's not only is it a sense of pride to them as a business, but it's a sense of pride to the area and to Lodo, because they're saying this is where we want to be. And this is the neighborhood we want to be in, and part of the community they want to be in. So that's, you know, we think it serves, I think, multiple purposes, not only for the company, but it also serves purposes for Lodo. And as, you know, Crystal stated, you know, we're showing 2 proposed locations. That's just to provide some flexibility depending on exactly, you know, which one may work best for the tenant, for the company, and maybe where they're located in the building. It's just providing some flexibility, but we would only use one of those. And the amended comprehensive sign plan basically does state that, you know, the design would fall within what the guidelines allow, whether it's a dimensional channel letter, a non-illuminated, mounted to the building, could be a flat cutout metal letter, or it could be a painted sign on the building. So, you know, we're trying to follow all those guidelines as closely as possible. We just think that it's a very unique situation because of this building having 3 frontages with an alley that bifurcates it. So it doesn't really have a back frontage. The articulation of the building on that frontage actually goes back. So where those are shown actually kind of is where I would also say kind of an architectural band. It wasn't intended to be a sign band, but there is a horizontal brick band. And so that's why we located them there. We looked at other areas on the building on other elevations and felt that it wasn't actually really architecturally appropriate. You know, if we were trying to do something on Market or Blake or 16th, it certainly could be done, but then we'd probably have to kind of figure out some kind of armature. And we don't feel like that actually would be as integrated to the building as these locations themselves would be. So just looking through my desk, making sure I've, yeah, and you can see as here, as I mentioned, you know, that building articulates back. So we're really kind of at where we're showing that is kind of almost at that top elevation or part of that building, then it articulates back to some balconies, and then the building continues up from there. So again, we really appreciate the commission's consideration and a review of this proposed CSP amendment, and certainly have questions. Brian, I don't know if you have any comments that you want to add.
Is it okay if I make a couple minutes of comments?
You
Okay.
have 4
I
minutes.
know you. 4? Okay, I can do it in 4. Thank you. There's nothing worse than overstaying your welcome. I'm Brian. We run a 900-person company that was founded at 18th and Blake in the basement of a fire station, right across from what used to be called Vesta's Dipping Grill, right next to what used to be an Irish pub. We've been here a long time, and we have always proudly associated ourselves not only with Denver, but with Lodo specifically. Our first 3 offices were in Lodo and in and around Union Station. And then we moved uptown to the Transamerica building, which of course everyone can see everywhere. And I do find it very helpful to reference when people are visiting or thinking about where they would be working as employees, to be able to reference the part of town that they may have seen. And so I say we're in the Transamerica building or the Garden Grace building or what have you. Of course, we never quite got to the signage on that building, but it is helpful. And we recently faced a decision. We could either leave Denver and go to Broomfield, or go to the tech center, or leave Colorado because of some of the AI regulations and so forth, or we could move to 1900, which is not in Lodo and over by the fire station over there, tall high-rise building. But we purposely decided not to do that in lower downtown Denver on the 16th Street Mall. And the reason why we did that is because we feel we need to do our part in terms of occupancy in lower downtown. It's at disturbingly low rates that has impacts on local businesses that we don't like to see. It's one of the reasons why we have a return to work policy, a return to Denver policy. For is not always the most popular thing, but it's important for the city. And I just want to say, I live here, and as a resident, I think what you do is super important. I don't know anything about architecture, but we will be totally respectful of whatever this commission decides. Obviously, from the standpoint of design, we're not looking for Shotgun Willie's signage here. This is just a basic white logo that says Ibotta. The same way we're on the bless you. The same way we're on the jerseys of the Denver Nuggets. We're trying to kind of build a brand that is proudly lower downtown Denver, and we're also trying to recruit other companies to lower downtown Denver. And so, if you read what the press in Denverite 2 days ago, me in a goofy Western shirt that I bought in Lodo, talking it up. And I've already had 3 phone calls from other CEOs that run companies that are thinking about what to do next. And I'm trying to create a critical mass down there in a way that still preserves the thing that we love about Lodo. And I've been trying to think about other ways of making the sign high enough that it complies and is not interruptive of the visual flow, what fits within the precedents like the Metro Chamber. And there I leave it to all of y'all. But I just wanted to say thank you for the work that you do. And if there's a way we can amend our application or do something that y'all think would make it more palatable, consistent with our goals, that would be amazing. So thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any commissioner questions for the applicant this morning?
You had mentioned studying some other locations. I'm looking at this photo here. Did you look at right around the corner, kind of above that balcony, the terrace deck, on the, I guess that'd be the Market Street facade? Just a curiosity.
We did. Again, we felt that it just didn't feel quite as integrated because the way the building articulated and placing it, I think with the fenestration, the window fenestration, openings, and then the articulation of the building, we just didn't feel like it fit right. Yeah, I don't think it's like on the opposite side of that photo, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think
But we could certainly, if the commission says, go back and look at that, we would certainly go back and look at that if needed.
Brian, I think you mentioned the size of your company coming in, and if I'm aware of this building correctly, it kind of has 2 lobbies. There's one off of Blake, and then there's one off of 16th Street. Are you guys taking the majority of the building? Is there a primary entry that you're going into?
Yeah.
To kind of go back to Crystal's comment about signage kind of reflecting entries into space. I'm curious as to how you're using that building.
There are definitely multiple entries that we'll be using. There are multiple, as you know, it crosses the alleyway and spans Blake and Market. So it's about 85,000 feet. We will be the primary residence in the building. It used to be Moy White, for those of you who know that law firm. They're no longer tenants. The upper 2 stories are residential, the ones that are reseated or whatever the word is. And then there's retail that hasn't been filled yet on the first floor that we may take at some point, but we haven't decided to take that right now because we don't really have it's an app, right? You don't need a storefront. Yeah, we expect that we'll be on the 4th, 5th, and 6th floor of the building before all is said and done. And we're, like I said, it's a 10-year lease horizon. And I think we expect to have the ROFR on the rest of the building as well. As far as it's hard to know exactly how we're going to use it because we're not moving in until September, but I would expect that we will have people entering from both blocks, as you say. And then we also have people that live and work in Highlands, people who live and work in Capitol Hill, people who live and work and come in on 25. I mean, most of our employees actually arrive to their office from I-25 and get off at Spear or at Aurora, right? And so as a visual reference point and as sort of, as Chuck was saying, a navigational element, this frontage, I think, is particularly relevant for people arriving, probably 80%, 90% of our employees arriving from the Spear Boulevard, 25 side of things. And as far as we think about just building our employment brand and the compelling value proposition of working downtown, it would be helpful at the margin for sure.
Any other questions for the applicant?
I thought I saw a hand raised. That's all I don't have.
We'll do that.
Yeah, yeah. Are there any other commissioner questions for the applicant?
Thank you again.
Thank you. Okay, we will open it up for public comment. So if you, is there anybody here?
Is that part or not? Okay. Thanks, y'all.
Yeah, you can sit down. Thank you. If there's anybody virtually who would like to comment, please raise your hand. And you'll be promoted to participant and in just a moment should be able to speak. Yes. Okay. Jane, hold tight. It sounds like it's a little slow. Jane, if you'd like to speak on this project, you'll need to accept the promotion to panelist so that you're able to speak. See your hand is raised, and then you'll be able to unmute. Okay, Jane, if you'd like to speak, you should be able to unmute. And if you could just start with name for the record, please.
Can you hear me?
We can. You've got 2 minutes.
Okay. My name's Jane Hood. I am the property manager at 16 Market Square. I work with Lincoln Property Company. I've been at 16 Market for about 5 years. I just wanted to clarify the 2 entrances because we do have residential condos on the 7th and 8th floors, and they have their separate entrance on Blake Street. So they're totally separated from the commercial side of the building. So, I mean, there's the front entrance for commercial side off of 16th Street Mall. And also there is the entrance through the parking garage. So I just wanted to clarify that, there was a different use for the 1560 Blake entrance.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jane.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Do we have anyone else from the public wishing to speak on this project? Please raise your hand. Okay, I'm not seeing any, and everybody in the room is not for this project. So we'll close public comment and open up for commission deliberation. Oh, I'm sorry. Crystal, do we have any staff follow-up?
I have one.
Okay, thank you, Brittany.
I looked into the Denver Metro Chamber of Commerce sign. Looking at their CSP, they did a CSP in 2015 that states that that sign is grandfathered into the CSP and can be relocated in very specific circumstances on that same elevation. But generally speaking, it says it's not to be moved, and a one-time relocation within architecturally sensitive areas is allowed. And so basically the CSP is saying it can be shifted over to the right and down a little bit. I did try to find the permit, but it's an older one, so I'm struggling to find that. But our design guidelines for signage were adopted in 2014, and that's when the requirement that upper story signs require a CSP was put in place, and all of the current guidelines applicable to upper story signs that Crystal referenced in terms of this application. So it's not really a good one-to-one comparison because it predates the design guidelines and even their own CSP, which was also done by Art House.
Great. Thank you, Brittany. Crystal, anything else? Okay.
Just one that maybe could answer what Crystal. Is the parking garage entry, I'm looking at it on Street View, is the parking garage entry off of Market here? I'm assuming that's.
No, I've parked in it. I think it's the entrance is Market. It's all.
Kinda-
Yeah.
Need everyone to use the microphones when speaking.
Sorry, we're not used to the microphone. We're just used to shouting and it all works. Nick, I've parked in this garage and because and this is where some of my kind of thoughts on the signs come from also. Market Street is one way coming into downtown. Blake is one way going towards Ball Arena and Auraria campus. And then 15th Street is one way heading towards Low High. And so I've parked in that parking structure before. The entrance to it is off of Market and the exit comes out on Blake. I didn't know if you have another question, or if not, I will just dive into my my thinking. And one reason why I asked the question about like the entrances, and which Jane was kind enough to kind of clarify, is as I was kind of looking at it, the guidelines notwithstanding, I just kind of looking at it and studying it and how the building is oriented and how one would approach the building and enter the building. I don't know that the sign on the Blake Street side of the building is appropriate because, you know, pedestrian wise or vehicular wise, and even as Brian said, most of their employees are going to be coming in that direction. It feels like the Market one way coming into downtown is going to be the sign that's the most visible, and then walking around the building and kind of looking at it. That's been my experience, is that I don't know that that Blake Street sign location really is going to have the visibility that they're looking for. So I think there's still discussion to be had about whether the upper story sign is appropriate at all. But I feel pretty strongly that if we were to approve it, we should only approve the Market half of the building. I just don't think that the visibility of that north one is going to justify a variance on our guidelines. But that's my opinion. I think it'll always be in the rear view, or it'll be behind you, kind of just the way that part of Lodo goes. So
Yeah, and I asked the question about the parking for that same reason. Like I don't know that I necessarily like object in a way to the upper story on Blake. It just doesn't make as much sense to me as the one that has been proposed. And you know, I think there is a wayfinding component given that the parking entry and where people are coming from in this location. And you know, I also think that while, you know, a literal reading of the guidelines, you know, wants signage to be on the primary facade, I think in the case of this building, there's not a great place to do it that wouldn't be on the building where there's a lot of very interesting brick articulation. And we'd probably all be sitting here hemming and hawing about how the sign relates to that. So I think you know, this seems like a pretty nice compromise from a wayfinding and also an honoring in a sense of the other more dynamic parts of the building personally.
You know, one of the things that I think is interesting in the context of this conversation are the existing upper story wall signs that we see in that part of the district and that we observe, you know, from Market Street, for example. And one of the things that I think that they generally do, including I think including the chamber, I think including 1331 17th, is that they're on non-contributing buildings above contributing buildings that extend beyond and above. So in a way, to me, I think it's actually kind of interesting how it highlights the historic character and the contemporary infill that is within it. I do agree that I think it'd be really challenging to put an upper story wall sign on the primary facades of this building that wouldn't feel like it was a real imposition on the architecture. I just don't really see a path to that. You know, I really am inclined to support it. I agree with Heather about putting it on the Blake Street side. It just doesn't make any sense to me. I'm not quite sure why. And, you know, maybe it's something we want to go back and discuss with the applicant if we want to, but I just can't see why anybody would put it there. And maybe there's something that I'm not seeing that they're thinking. But Market Street does, I think, serve very much as a gateway into downtown and into Lodo specifically. And I think those upper story wall signs are sort of serve that gateway function as well.
I also think, and Nick, maybe it was you that brought up the question. Yeah, I think that there's a possibility, and I think there's some rationale and visibility to putting it on the section of the building. It's right there that's where it's 4 stories and then it steps back again. You know, I think that I think that if they really wanted 2 options of where they could put a sign, I think that would be a good secondary spot for it. It's a pretty flat brick band and parapet, and it seems like that would hold a sign well. But
I want to make sure I'm understanding. So you're talking about on the facade of the parking garage, essentially. Yeah. And again, I mean, I look at that, and yes, there's flat surface there, but just signage on the parking garage then comply with or even reflect our guidelines about signage in buildings, and you know what I'm saying?
well, I think it's still in the same plane as where they had proposed the upper story sign, Fred. So I'm talking about, yes, still on the same elevation where they're proposing it, just on the section of it where it tops out over the 4th story instead of topping out over the 6th story. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think that, you know, the guidelines state they can have one. You know, in the case of this building, it's such a large building and it sort of reads as 2 from, you know, so I think you could even make an argument that they could push for both if they wanted to. However, you know, I think leaving the optionality as proposed, you know, I have no issue with, and I think there's precedent. You know, we do it like at 1420 Wazee, where we review non-primary facades as if they're primary facades, given the prominence and the visibility. I think this is a case that's somewhat similar to that, just at what you see as you come up Market or Blake for that matter. So, you know, I think it's fine to give them options.
Yeah, I just want to clarify that I think that the way that it is in the application and the way that they have amended the CSP is that these two options are options and that there's only one sign. It's just two options of location for that sign. So, Craig?
I'm inclined to agree with the discussion so far. I'm not opposed to having a variance on this one. I feel like the proposed facade can be viewed as a primary facade given the architecture. I agree that having it on any other facade would be disruptive to the architecture. And I think even the photos that were presented, they were taken from pedestrian scale. So even though while they're large and it's upper story, it's still going to be visible from a pedestrian perspective as well. It's not like the Quest building that plagued Denver for years and years. This is one that you'll still see. It's not lit. So I feel like it's appropriate for the district and especially for the edge condition right there as well.
Any other thoughts? Andy, you looked like you might have something to say.
No,
All right.
I don't need the microphone, but I'm agreeing with everybody, so yeah.
Okay. For the record, Andy is agreeing.
So it sounds like you're looking at a different recommendation than what is in the staff report. So I just am requesting that the commission look closely at the design guidelines that are referenced in the staff report. So 1.2 is about integrating signs into areas that highlight pedestrian entrances and are easily viewable by the sidewalk. 1.4 does specifically say locate signs at the first floor pedestrian level. So I'm not quite sure that one's applicable. But again, up for y'all to debate. And then 1.10 are the design standards for upper story signs. I would probably incline to recommend that you reference intent statement 1.10 that says to allow upper story signage in unusual cases to acknowledge a signature tenant, etc. So just something for you to consider as you make the motion.
Thanks, Brittany. Would somebody care to make a motion, or is there further discussion the commission would like to have?
I personally think you should take out 1.4 at minimum. But the rest I think are fine.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we just want to design policy standards and guidelines under 1.10.
Yeah, I think it's simple. Yeah.
See how this works. I move to approve application 2022 CSP-011-amend for the addition of 2 upper story wall sign locations at 1400 16th Street as per design policy standards and guidelines under 1.10, presented testimony, submitted documentation, and information provided in the staff report.
Thanks, Fred. Before I ask for a second. Okay, would somebody care to second Fred's motion?
Second. I second.
Great. Thank you, Nick. Before we take a roll call, Fred, the way that your motion went is approving the application as it's presented with both of the upper story signs at Market and Blake. Is that the intent of your motion?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, whilst I agree with you that I don't think the Blake Street is very good, I think it's acceptable within this context. Frankly, even though Blake Street is traffic-wise running the other way from a pedestrian standpoint, et cetera, people do walk that other direction. And if for some reason they decided that that was the better location, I think that's their choice. I don't think it's as good. Personally, if I was making the decision, I'm with you. I mean, Mark, it's the place. It seems clear, but I kind of feel like that's their choice to make.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that was the intent behind the motion because we discussed something different. We have a motion from Fred. We have a second from Nick. We need to pass the mic around and do a roll call, or? Okay, we'll do a hand raise. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, I'm seeing all but Jim. Any opposed? Mr. Graebner, and any abstentions? I see none. Did you get all that? Okay. Great. Congratulations. We will move on to the second item on our agenda today, which is 2024-COA-960 at 1550 Market Street. Outdoor dining patio railing and canopy. And I'll turn it over to Amy as soon as she's ready.
Morning, everyone. Amy Amadon on behalf of Landmark staff presenting 1550 Market Street. This is a request for a new outdoor dining patio for STK Steakhouse. This image on the screen shows the overall mass of the building. It's a pretty large structure. And one of the things to start out describing to you is that the tallest portion of the building is in Special District 2 and the lower portion is not. Special District 2 requires a concurring vote of 6 members of the commission in order to approve a project. The dining patio we're going to discuss is in the area where the red arrow indicates. There has been a temporary outdoor structure unapproved there that will be replaced. And the proposed outdoor dining area is a little bit longer than what's shown there. One of the things I also want to point out, just as we're looking at this view, the leased space crosses that kind of gasket between the taller and the lower part, and the architecture changes above the storefront. The transom detail changes. So it does appear to me that the proposed canopy will be slightly lower than what you have at Panera Bread and that main entry. So it's something to bear in mind. The staff recommendation for this project is denial with regard to the canopy. But again, looking at this view, we do feel that some pedestrian scaling elements are a valuable addition to this building. So it's not that we don't support the notion of some sort of awning or canopy to protect the outdoor dining that's proposed, but just not as designed. Next slide, please. Here's a plan view. The pink line indicates the actual seating area. And then you see the louvered metal canopy that's to be above it. The canopy is much larger than the dining area. Staff has been talking with this applicant for some time, trying to coach to a solution we could agree on. Previously, the canopy was actually smaller than this. The idea that we've conveyed to the applicant, our concern with the canopy, is that awnings and canopies, according to the guidelines, are supposed to specifically relate to fenestration, protect doors and windows and people standing beneath them from weather. And because of the leased area not being quite aligned with those elements of the building, what's proposed is a very long canopy that spans across piers between fenestration and is larger than the necessary, perhaps, for the outdoor dining. Next slide, please. Here you see the project in elevation. So there's a bronze colored metal railing that would have frosted glass panels on the inside of it. Staff is in support of that. But the canopy above, also a bronze metal element, again, spanning across elements of the architecture in a way that staff finds does not meet the guidelines. Next slide, please. A rendering of the proposal, just to note that signage there would be pursued under a separate permit, so that's not part of the discussion today. You can see, I believe, in this image that this canopy sits a little lower than the building entry canopy. Of course, there's an effort here to shelter the diners who are at a much lower level, but there will be a difference on the facade in terms of where certain awning elements are placed in height. And again, crossing those architectural elements in a way that staff is concerned about. Next slide, please. Here you see a side view of the proposed railing and canopy. And next to that, some images of pendant lighting and heaters that are meant to hang from the canopy. Next slide, please. This rendering shows a nighttime view of the canopy, and it shows some linear lighting that seems to surround the edges of each kind of panel of the canopy. That staff finds isn't detailed very well in the application. We also have a concern that it is not meeting guidelines that talk about providing a low level of lighting on the facade of a building. Next slide, please. So the staff recommendation is to approve the project with conditions, approve the railing and the general location of the outdoor dining area, but not approve the canopy as designed. We certainly would be happy to continue to work with the applicant. We think, outdoor dining meets several of the guidelines, enlivening the streetscape, good idea. And again, adding some elements to this facade that create a sort of warmer pedestrian scale to that part of town, but we don't support the canopy as designed, finding that it does not meet the guidelines.
Thank you, Amy. Do we have any staff questions from the commission? Okay.
Just to confirm, the proposed canopy is in alignment with the bottom horizontal mullion on the building on the left and the horizontal mullion on the building on the right. Is that correct?
Well, let's see if we could go back, Brittany, to the slide where you see the side view of the canopy. It's back maybe two, couple more. It's a drawing.
Yeah, it looks like the rendering to me looks slightly different than the elevation, than the 2D elevation.
Well, here, and again, the treatment of the storefront changes as you move to the lower building. The storefront's not quite as tall. So I believe on the taller portion of the building, the horizontal elements are sitting at the very top of the transom. And here they're sitting at sort of the midline of it, which transitions between the treatment on the tall building and the lower building. But there's definitely a height difference from what I'm reading.
Amy, this may not be a question that you can answer, and we need to maybe need to ask the applicant. Do you know where they are, and have they had any other discussions with other city agencies?
I don't know where they are in the DOTI review process in
Okay.
terms of an encroachment.
Okay, thanks. Are there any other questions for staff? Craig?
Thank you. It looks like we have a minimum dimension for awnings and their projection. Is there any maximum?
I don't know the answer to that. Maybe Brittany can help.
Okay. Well, and then follow up, is there any guidelines from DOTI or whatnot about maximum encroachment into the right of way then?
I mean, we may need to wait for the applicant's presentation, but the reason that I asked that question to Amy is my recent experience is that the city is no longer granting encroachments that exceed 4 feet from the property line, in which case they would have an issue with the depth of this canopy regardless, which is why I asked the question. But if we don't have any more questions for staff, we should invite the applicant to give their presentation. Does anybody else have anything for Amy or?
This may also be an applicant question, so I apologize, but one of the comments was related to, and this is a good elevation, that the canopy, particularly at the left side of the image, is extending beyond the extent of the patio. Is there a reason that the patio doesn't extend all the way out there?
I think that is a question for the applicant. And as I said, the proposal has evolved as staff has discussed it. It was actually smaller and more of a covering just over the outdoor dining as we initially saw. And we provided feedback to the applicant that we felt it needed to relate to the architecture more clearly, and they responded to that by expanding it. So I think they need to explain what their idea is.
Any further questions for staff? Okay, thank you, Amy.
Thank you.
We don't have anyone in person, so I'm assuming the applicant is virtual. So we'll get you switched over to panelist here shortly. And as soon as you accept that, you should be able to unmute and give your presentation. And just with the last one, we'll have you start with names and address for the record, please. And you'll have 10 minutes once we're all ready to go. I think you've both been promoted to panelists, so feel free to unmute and begin your presentation when you're ready.
Josh and
Michael?
you're both unmuted.
Yeah, hello, this is Joshua Cool. I am the Vice President of Development and Design for the One Group, who is the owner of STK Steakhouse. This location for us is really our corporate store in our downtown location, and a very important entity for us, especially here within Denver, since our corporate office is Denver is the home of our corporate office. This patio was first integrated into the site during COVID, and there was a huge necessity for obviously exterior dining. With that said, the patio has become somewhat of a very popular place to dine and experience STK, and to experience kind of the vibrant culture of Lodi. And as we were developing the patio, we originally were designing it to be kind of operably and enclosed, kind of in addition to the restaurant, and working with the team and Brittany. We have moved on to creating basically a patio that can still be pedestrian friendly and accompany the outdoor dining. We had a strong feeling that we needed to place a permanent canopy above the patio, really to prevent and kind of prevent inclement weather, rain and whatnot, to protect. Sorry about that. To protect our patrons when they're there. And looking at the canopy, we were looking at the intrinsic geometry of the buildings. And of course, there's two separate, it's an interesting case because there's two separate facades and buildings that somewhat go very well together, but are at different heights. And what we tried to do is kind of combine those geometries and lines, intrinsic lines across the facade to come together. We also felt that if you took really the middle kind of dominant mullion that breaks up those kind of bays in the middle, and ran that canopy across at that height, that would obviously, I think, work for us. The only issue that we really had with it is the height. And at a certain point, a canopy at a certain height doesn't function, we think, effectively to protect and provide protection to our patrons at a certain height. And that was one of the reasons of bringing that down and trying to take in the lower geometries of the mullions, kind of the sub mullions of that facade across that space. We also felt that continuing the mullions across the bays felt that it fit better within the current facades and not stopping them at our lease line. Our lease line inside the building doesn't go along completely with that canopy. And the reason that it was extended was to kind of tie it into the existing bays of both of those buildings. On the right side, there is actually an entrance to that building, and the canopy does provide coverage for that entrance, which is not our entrance. And then to answer the question the gentleman asked, the reason why the patio doesn't extend further left towards Morgan Stanley and the old Panera site is that our landlord did not want to encroach any further past our lease line towards their space as they felt that encroached into their entry too much. Michael, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I thank you for reviewing this. Architecturally, Josh, you captured a lot of the thought behind the width, the expanse, and the height location. It does line up with a mullion on both sides. On the left building, it is in line with call it the bottom or a major mullion. And then on the right, it's sort of a middle mullion. And you did also mention that it was extended on the left because of lining up with the window bay, the storefront. I will say this elevation does tell a lot of the story. The design guidelines do mention to align canopy awning structures with entrances, and you can see in this elevation there are 4 entrances that this would be covering in addition to the outdoor dining. So it just would look very choppy to start and stop only at the entrances, and then it would not cover that significant portion in the middle to protect the dining. The use of the canopy is also designed to provide the heat and lighting for the dining. And I think without the canopy, the alternative would be umbrellas and patio heaters. And architecturally speaking, we feel that would be much more cluttered, not integrated, and not necessarily in line with the style of the building.
Thank you. Do you have anything further, Josh or Michael?
I would just ask if the team had any other questions that we did not answer. Could you remind us of those questions? The other thing on my mind was that this is part of a DOTI at the ground level. It has been reviewed by DOTI, and we're just trying to move forward with the easement and in a way that we can also have the coverage that makes sense.
Okay, thank you. I will open it up for commissioner questions. So I'll start because I had the question and you touched on it a little bit. Have you gotten approvals on your canopy encroachment for the depth that you have?
No.
Okay.
We understood the process that we needed that your approval before moving forward with that.
Okay. Fred, looks like you have a question.
Hi, thanks. I've got a couple of questions just to help me understand this better. You mentioned that part of the point of the canopy is protection from inclement weather and rain. And I'm rather a bit confused. When I look at your bird's eye perspective on sheet 4.4, that appears to show a louver system that doesn't provide rain protection. And on sheet 1.4, you have 2 quote unquote elevations, numbers 2 and 3, which from how they're drawn really appear to be sections. But I'm again not sure because they're not labeled as sections, they're labeled as elevations that show a louver system that appears to let water through. And I guess if it doesn't, I'm not sure where the water goes. So I wanted to ask about that because I'm just not clear from your drawings what the
So the louvers would be able to capture the rain, and the system that we've looked at is mechanical, so they open and close. And when they close, they capture in their top. They'll capture the water and bring it to the sides. There's a gutter system that you saw where the lights were. I agree the lighting detail was not too well explained, but there's basically a perimeter that would have a downspout to bring the water down.
Okay. And tell me where, because I guess I've just missed the gutters then. Help me see what drawing those are on, just so I understand where those are and how they sit.
It would be at either side in elevation.
On
Have to come.
patio railing. So
I would say the first bay, we can design it, however, to be honest with you.
So
one of the is
that actually on the elevation? I mean, I'm looking at sheet 1.
No.
So that's
No, so
something that you'll add, but it's not on the drawings.
Correct.
Okay. Secondly, I did have a question about the lighting, because I'm finding it a little hard to understand what the intent of the interior lighting is. When I look at some of your renderings, some of that lighting does appear to be on the outside. If you look, for example, at 4.3, that seems to pretty clearly show a light on the outside of the canopy. Is that your intent? Is that just an error in the drawings? I'm just not quite clear.
That's a rendering error. Yes, that's a rendering error. So it would be an interior subtle light at the perimeter gutter.
All right, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to follow up on his comment, where, so you said it's a perimeter gutter. Where might the downspouts be then?
So they can be integrated anywhere in the system. So I'm picturing that first bay from the left to the right, about where the first railing is, directly behind that first railing. There's a
okay, on the vertical mullion there in the
vertical
storefront?
mullion there, yes.
Following up on that, where are those downspouts discharged to? Do they discharge right onto the sidewalk? Will you be able to tie them into any site drainage system?
My understanding is they could be brought to the curb, trenched in the sidewalk.
This is Nick. I have one question. On the left and the right side, I guess I understand the logic of the canopy sort of ending at the brick pilaster, but is it cantilevering then from whatever the adjacent? I'm skeptical that there's not really a structural detail, so I'm wondering how how those ends of the canopy are actually attached and staying upright.
So that can be, we will accomplish that. I didn't want to get into structural details. We provided a full structural set initially, and then as we've been through several iterations, we wanted to get the design approval before engineering each version.
Do we have any other commissioner questions for the applicant? Okay, I'm not seeing any. So thank you, Josh. Thank you, Michael. Do we have any public comment? If you're on the Zoom, please raise your hand so you can be moved over as a panelist. Okay, not seeing any. And for the record, there is no more members of the public in the room. Do we have any staff follow-up? Okay, no staff follow-up from Amy. So we will open commission deliberations. What does everybody think? Craig.
Thank you. I agree fully with staff's recommendation on this one. I find the canopy to be non-compliant and detrimental to the established architectural patterns. Not to mention just some of the concerns with the the representation here versus, you know, the disconnect between the renderings and the drawings give me a lot of pause. So I fully agree with staff's recommendation on this one.
I'm more inclined to agree with the applicant on this one. You know, I do think the placement of the canopy is actually the most sensitive and appropriate placement, you know, on the building. It is in alignment with the existing mullions. I don't see any other potential placement that would be more reasonable as it transitions from the left facade to the right facade. The only other option I think would be pulling it up, but you know, to align with the more dominant horizontal mullion and the solid portion on the facade to the right, the banding. But I think that would be too high to shield from any weather, and I don't think it would feel reasonable on the facade.
Go to Fred and we'll go back to Craig.
You know, I'm a big supporter of outdoor dining, and I think it's really important for the district, for downtown, et cetera. But I'm inclined to go with staff's recommendation at this point, mostly because I don't feel like this is fully developed. You know, again, there's disconnects in there to just sort of, as a hand waiver, say, well, there's going to be some downspouts, and we'll figure out where those go later. I mean, you know, we're approving design details here. We're not approving a concept. And so it bothers me that there seems to be a lot of things missing from this, that we need more information. I'm not totally convinced about the placement of the canopy, but I'm also not sure that I can come up with a better answer. It is challenging, and but certainly I feel like we need a more complete, more thorough set of drawings to be able to approve something.
Craig, you're gonna have to wait. I'm inclined to agree with the applicant on this one. This is a non-contributing building. The facade is relatively flat without a lot of, we'll say, articulation, where the last applicant had just a plethora and it was really hard to find a flat surface. This whole building is flat and it's set up on a modular system. So seeing that line of a canopy going across, I think for this particular building, it works. I mean, yeah, there's some places where we can cut it, but then it starts looking really choppy, which is not what this building is about. But I do agree with Fred. It's like the concept is there, but there's a lot of hand waving and there's some detailing in terms of water discharge and how things operate, and you know, how is this attached to the building? I'm a little dubious that, you know, we're just going to close our eyes and say we're going to go to a pilaster but not touch the pilaster, but it's going to connect somehow, cantilever out. I think there needs to be a little investigation into how this ties back into the building, because my fear is if we approve the concept as is, and it is a concept, that once they go into structural design, then we need to plus or minus a foot, and then it's not going to work, I don't think, as elegantly as it is right now. And so the concept I'm fine with, but I'm dubious as to how this is going to be detailed and finalized.
I agree with the previous remarks, totally. The concept is good, and it's well in line with the concept that's been approved previously for the whole building. But I think it needs to be detailed further, especially that side of the building, which gets a lot of shade. And then that would be one thing I'd be worried about too.
Thank you, sir. You know, to be a little more specific though on some of my hesitancy with the articulation of the concept is, you know, I agree that we've probably found a good compromise on its vertical location and its alignment with the horizontal mullions. But it's the the complete disregard for the module of the buildings and even the two separate quote unquote buildings that it just cuts right across. And I think there are ways that you can still have a canopy that spans all of that, but have a little more hierarchy and acknowledgement to the module by perhaps breaking, without designing it, but there's some ways that I can see that should be explored that can still achieve a unified canopy across, but still acknowledge the architecture a little better. And I think then satisfy some of the design guidelines that have been quoted here. I agree that the hand waving is something that needs to be resolved. And I can see, as we have some disagreement on the canopy, we haven't talked any bit about the railing itself. So I would hate our disagreement on the canopy to hold up necessarily the railing approval. So I would, just ask the fellow commissioners here that, maybe there's a way we can still approve that railing. I have no problems with the railing.
But to follow up on your last comment, Craig, I mean, the staff's recommendation is approval of the railing and denial of the canopy, which is an approach that we could take here. I'm in agreement with kind of Craig and Fred's comments particularly. I think that there's a way, like they could still get a linear canopy. I think that how that is detailed and articulated could be improved and could be more responsive to the architecture. I know like looking at the structure and when you get to the corner to where Panera was, and they've got a very consistent linear canopy, but that corner also has a very different architecture and doesn't have as strong of a brick pilaster module on that. And so that canopy is responding to the architecture, which this canopy in its iteration, I don't think does. I also have some concerns about kind of the lack of detail of how it's to be attached, drained, the inconsistencies with the lighting and some of those errors in that application. And I also just have some concerns about the overall projection depth from the building to the street. And I would really encourage that the applicant start the encroachment application with the city, because I suspect that is going to dictate your depth here, just based on very recent experience with those encroachments. I think that will be a challenge. So I take no objection to the railing. I think it's fine. I think the canopy needs more work to be approvable and is not approvable in its current application. I would, if there's no further comment, I would love a motion. Fred?
I move to approve with conditions application 2024 COA 960, such that the location of the outdoor dining area and the surrounding railing are approved, but the canopy, lighting, and heaters are not approved for 1550 Market Street, as per design policy, standards and guidelines 5.3, 7.1, 7.2, and 10.4 from the Design Guidelines for Lower Downtown Historic District, 4.3 from the Denver Guidelines for Landmark Structures and Districts, and the section on sidewalk cafes from the Design Guidelines for Lower Downtown Streetscape. Presented testimony, submitted documentation, and information provided in the staff report.
Thank you, Fred. Do we have a second? Right. Andy seconds. We'll do a hand raise again. All those in favor? All right, that is unanimous. So any opposed? For the record, there are none. Any abstentions? For the record, there are none. All right, motion passes as made. So with that, we will close design review. We do have a couple of business items today, so I will turn it over to Brittany and Amy, staff. Yes. Okay, so the process for business items is up on the screen today. These items do require commission deliberation and voting. So I'll announce each item. Staff will introduce each business item, at which time commissioners can question staff. We will open it up to public comment, although I don't believe we have anyone remaining on the virtual meeting, and there's no one here in public or in the room. We'll follow up with staff clarifications if there are any, have commission deliberation, and then a commission motion and vote. So the first item, business item today is the LDDRC bylaws. Yes.
Numbers wise, if I leave shortly.
I don't think business items need a supermajority.
So the bylaws that we have before you today are the based off of comments provided by the commission at the last meeting. Essentially, we have made clarifications regarding the filing deadline. A big change for this commission is that we are proposing to move the filing deadline to 4 weeks. However, per commission discussion, the chair and staff can make adjustments to that 4-week filing deadline to accommodate application items. So that is included in the bylaws here. It's very simple language though, but that is the intent of that language. We've also clarified meetings of the commission, and this is to allow virtual attendance of the commissioners provided we have an in-person quorum. Per consultation with the attorneys, quorum would mean 5. So even when items require 6 to pass, in-person quorum would only need to be 5. So we have clarified that with the commission. We've removed old language regarding emergency meetings, as that is in the city ordinances. We have added a public comment section at the beginning of this meeting, just to align with LPC. I know there was some discussion, but we felt overwhelmingly that the commission felt like adding general public comment wouldn't negatively impact this meeting. We are keeping comment for each design review item after each item. And while we do not have many public hearings at this commission, there's been no major changes to the public comment period for public hearings. We did remove the requirement that speakers would need to register with the chair prior to the providing that public comment. So those are the proposed changes. This is our final draft. We are recommending that the commission approve this. We are proposing an effective date of next year, just so we could finish out this year. But this is our last meeting of this year. So effectively, this would go into effect at the next meeting.
Great. Thank you, Brittany. Questions for staff? Yeah, it was recorded. You do. Sorry. No longer.
Okay, well, just as clarification to the filing deadline, and I appreciate the language of unless otherwise approved by the commission. What's from a process standpoint, is that to be determined at a given hearing? You know, this was the intention here is to allow for someone that's got minor adjustments to refile for the next.
Yeah, I think that when we discussed it last, the intent was like a continuation, but
that is the intent, and I did have it more spelled out clearly. The attorneys advised us to simplify that language to the language that you're seeing there before you today. So it would be set at a meeting here by the commission that you could adjust the filing deadline.
Any other questions for staff? Okay, not seeing any. I don't think we need any staff clarification on anything. Deliberation, thoughts? Fred's got a thumbs up.
Maybe this is just a friendly thought, but on that subject, I don't know if it's possible to articulate that to applicants as they're applying, whether that's on the website or somehow to indicate how that would work, I think would be helpful.
Any other thoughts? Someone care to make a motion?
Thank you. I move to amend the LDDRC bylaws as presented with an effective date of January 1st, 2025.
Thanks, Craig. Do we have a second?
I second.
Thank you, Nick. All those in favor of the motion? For the record, all hands are raised. That is unanimous. So any opposed? There are none. And any abstentions? There are none. So the second business item for discussion today is public comment policy.
So this is just our public comment policy. Essentially, it was rewritten to reflect what is in the bylaws. It includes processes regarding that general public comment that we will be adding to the agenda. Additionally, we used to request that addresses be provided, but the attorneys has advised us that that is not required. So in this frequently asked questions, it just says you may provide your address if you wish. So the public comment policy is just reflective of the bylaws.
Thanks, Brittany. Any questions for staff? Okay, not seeing any, so we don't need any follow-up. Any deliberation comments? And if not, if someone cares to make a motion?
So moved.
You read it on the.
Oh. I move to amend the LDDRC public comment policy as presented with effective date of January 1st.
For the record, that was 2025. Thank you, Jim. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, a second from Andy. All those in favor? All right, aye, that was unanimous. Any opposed? For the record, there are none. Any abstentions? There are none. Okay, that closes our business items. We have any discussion items today? Nope. Okay. So with that, we will close the meeting and adjourn at 9:52. Thanks, everybody. Happy holidays. We'll see you next year.